Good afternoon. This is Bob Celeste, and this is Open Mic Friday. For all of you who are on the call directly today, if you'd like to talk to our guest today, please go to the webinar part and either raise your hand or type in a question, and I'll try to open up your mic, and you could join in on the conversation. So I'd like to welcome to the call Dirk Rodgers, who is a global regulatory strategist and expert with expertise in pharma and medical device supply chain and serialization, track and trace. Dirk and I have known each other for quite a while now. We go back to the California drug pedigree days. Dirk, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
Good. So, I wanted to have you on, Dirk, to kind of, now that we're at the point where we have in the US serialization, DSCSA, and the EU FMD just sort of went online last weekend. Kind of pick your brain a little bit about your thoughts about where we've come, where we're going, and in those two areas. And also, I think you have some insights into the Russian regulation also. But first, if we could just talk a little bit about Dirk. What are you doing? I know that you're writing the RxTrace blog, and maybe give us a little details on that.
Sure. Well, in fact, I've been writing RxTrace, the blog about these exact topics, since 2009. Wow. So this summer it'll be 10 years. It's just hard to believe, but been writing that long, pretty much once a week at least. Sometimes when there's big news or things going on, I'll write more than once a week. But so that's going on. I'm also in a job search at this point. My previous job came to an end last week, or earlier this week, actually. So that's really all that's going on at this point, Bob.
Dirk, people are starting to bid on you right now on the online. So.
That's great to hear, but.
So, one of the things I appreciate that you do, you talked about your blog, and this is not just an opinion blog. So it's not like a 3 sentences and an opinion on something and maybe something controversial. You actually take a topic and you really dive into it. I mean, it's an exploration of the topic.
Yeah.
And you walk away from it appreciating not only what the details are, but a lot of the nuance and a lot of the industry kind of thoughts and feelings around the topic. That's what I appreciate about what you do is in your writing.
Good. Well, I'm glad you appreciate that. And I should also say, though, I don't shy away from opinions.
That's true.
Yeah. But you're right. I've heard that from a lot of people, because my intention is to be an educational resource, sort of explore things that I wish had been out there for me when I was trying to learn these things. We're all continually learning, and now it's to the point where when I learn something new, I have an avenue where I can sort of share what I've learned through RxTrace. And so, as you mentioned, I've been studying the Russia regulations as they are today recently, and so I've been writing a fair amount about the Russia regulations on RxTrace as I learn things, and hopefully that'll help others. The educational aspect of it really kind of started back when I can't remember what year it was, but it was in the first couple of years. I always wanted a description of the National Drug Code, the NDC, and all of the characteristics of it and the history of it, and there was nothing out there that I could find. And so I started to study up on it. I did find some resources, but not a complete resource. And so I wrote The Anatomy of the National Drug Code, which is an essay that I wrote in 2012, I think, or maybe it was earlier, 2010, I don't know. But anyway, and that today is still over, when you look at over 90 days, it's still the top hit essay out there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
And I bet probably people use a lot of that material in slides, because you're right, there isn't any one place where you could go to understand this thing.
Yeah. Exactly. And so after, I really liked what came out of that essay. And so in the next following weeks, that same month, I wrote The Anatomy of the G10. I wrote Anatomy of, or how to depict a G10, an NDC within a G10, and things like that. And so those are very educational. They really break things down for you, probably in more detail than most people really even need. But I always wanted a complete resource of those kinds of things.
That's great.
So, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the old Reader's Digest. I am Joe's heart, I am Joe's liver. You really get into the life of the of the body part.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of essays out there like that. There's also as regulations come out, I sort of try and break the regulations down, or at least different aspects of them. And of course, at some point in there's usually an opinion.
Yeah, and I think but what I think is interesting that you do very well is that even though you have an opinion, you have a side that you're picking, or you believe in, you fairly represent all the different ways, the facets of looking at something, and that's helpful for someone that's trying to get an idea of context of why are people having an argument here.
Yeah, I try to do that. Yeah, exactly. And I wish there were more activity on the comments at the bottom of the essay from readers, because there's obviously, you can't always be successful in representing properly opinions that you may not agree with, and so I may have something wrong, and I wish, if I am wrong, people would respond and let's get a dialogue going, and maybe I'll learn something. Interestingly, I wrote an essay about GS1's their global data synchronization, GDSN. And I got a really good response from a guy who was in their data quality group, because I was hammering them about data quality or something. And they said, we do have a data quality standard and a data quality program. And so I felt really bad. So I had to modify that essay significantly to correct it. Yeah, to correct it. And then the next week I wrote an essay about the GS1 data quality efforts.
There you go. So it's good to speak up. And to everybody that's on the call, that speaks to you too. Join in on the conversation. It's good to throw your own thoughts in here. Actually, we have someone has a question right away. So let me just bring them on, and then let's get into DSCSA, EU FMD, and the Russian regulation. Let me see. I've got Carl on the line here. Hey, Carl, are you on?
I am.
There he is. You have a question for Dirk?
Actually, no, it was more of a comment that I totally agree with him. I read I read the blog religiously, and I try to comment, but often we get busy, we move on to something else. That could be a very fruitful area for a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I agree. Carl, you're great. I love your comments, not only on the essays you have commented on, but also on LinkedIn as well. So thanks for that.
Yeah, Dirk, one of the things that I've found is I do a lot of work with new product launches and helping people in that vein, and NDC always pops up as one of the first things they've got to do and learn, particularly if they're overseas clients.
Yep, that's why it's the most popular essay out there, I'm sure. I've been told by some people that when they do hire new people in this area, one of the first things they do is they just get them set up with a web browser, and they take them to RxTrace, and they just say, start reading.
Right.
Use the search bar or the search feature, because if you're interested in aggregation, type aggregation in, and you'll just get a list of all the essays I touch on aggregation, and there's a lot of them. Verification, you just pick a term that you're interested in learning about, and type it in, and you'll get a lot of wealth out of it.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl.
So Dirk, maybe you could take a kind of a quick run through of let's take the three: the DSCSA, the EU FMD, and the Russian regulation, and just give us an idea what they're all about, and maybe then we can start to talk a little bit about some of the differences between them.
Sure. Yeah, well, in fact, let's start with the DSCSA. DSCSA, you read a lot when you read anything written about DSCSA. People talk about it being track and trace. I've always, I probably fell into that trap as well. I don't really consider the DSCSA so much track and trace as it is just a documentation requirement, which can be used. Those documents can be used later when something is found to be suspicious. to track backwards to figure out what really did happen. But a true track and trace regulation would require you to store maybe in a central or in some distributed repository, the history of the product so that it could be quickly searched by third parties or by you or others. In a way, you could say this documentation, the DSCSA requires you to save the T3, as many people refer to it, as track and trace documentation, but it's not really accessible to anybody but you until there's a need for looking at it. On the other hand, the FMD, as implemented under the delegated regulation, is truly a great example of a verification or an authentication system, where at the point of dispense, the data is centrally located. Pharmacies can quickly scan the barcode and get a response very quickly, indicating whether or not that product was actually made, that number matches one that was made by the manufacturer, and it is supposedly still available for sale. So it at least makes an attempt to provide that level of functionality. I think that there are issues with the implementation, but I got to say the documentation in the delegated regulation, I was always very impressed. It seemed to have been written by engineers, or maybe only one engineer, I don't know, but it was quite easy to understand and follow compared to the DSCSA text, which seems to be filled with text contributed by many authors and is very political, or at least it has elements that I think are the result of politics within the industry and with the FDA and others. And so it's very difficult to really understand exactly what they mean and what you're supposed to do, or at least it's harder than the delegated regulation was. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so the EU FMD is more prescriptive in the what or the how also, right?
Yes, it is. There have been very few questions that I get lots of questions, by the way, and I'm happy to answer questions. Send me an email if you've got a question about a specific section of or a specific attribute of one of these regulations. I try to respond. It might take me a couple of days to get to you, but I try to always respond to those. And I get a lot of questions about the FMD, and there's very few that I can't answer. And by the way, when I give you an answer, I will give you the sections of the delegated regulation or whatever the regulation is that supports my interpretation. And of course, I give you the disclaimer. This is my personal opinion, my personal interpretation of that section or those sections. But usually, because I'm able to isolate the regulation, the section of the regulations that explain it, it's usually pretty straightforward. And if people disagree, then that's good. They need to make their own decisions, not just take what I say as exactly what it is. Because of course you can't use the excuse that, well, Dirk told me.
Right.
When your regulator knocks on your door, you can't just say Dirk told me.
Well, I have my copy of the regulation, so we'll play lightning round later on. No.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, that'd be fun.
And what about the Russian regulation? I mean, that's quickly coming upon us now.
It is, and it's really confusing for multiple reasons. First of all, it's in Russian, and there's some companies have done translations. I did an actual translation using Google Translate and offered it one of the earlier decrees, not the current ones, but the previous decrees. Even when you do a translation, it's not always straightforward if what the words really mean. Okay, when they're in English, because they are translated. And but another reason is that there's multiple agencies involved, and the earlier agencies seem to have lost the power or the authority, and now it's taken over by the taxing authority, which I think explains some of the actions they've taken. Is that it's really more for confirming that you've paid the tax on your pharmaceutical than it is as much about of counterfeits, preventing counterfeits, but obviously it is for that as well. So you're right, and so that regulation is sort of a bunch of everything. you're providing the government central repository with all the track and trace information and the information necessary for doing a point of dispense authentication. And so it's a heavy regulation with lots of data. The most interesting thing, and the thing that probably is on the minds of most people right now, is that the barcode contents has something they call a crypto code, which is a cryptographic, appears to be just a cryptographic hash of the G10 and serial number data elements. But you can't create it. You have to request the government to create it, either through a web service or through a piece of hardware device that they will provide to you for your environment. Mostly that's for companies in the boundaries of Russia.
Oh,
so yeah, and so that.
Do they have their own? I guess they're using their own proprietary algorithm for creating this hash, I guess.
Who knows? I mean, they're not going to share that with us, right?
Right.
So it could very well be just a standard cryptographic hash calculation, but the device and the web service just hides the private key that they would be using in order to create the hash. And so
Gotcha.
only the government can create that hash, and only as long as it's documented in the taxing authority, so that they know once that hash is delivered to you, they've made note that you have produced and are marketing that unit of that drug and what that drug is. So yeah, but the problem is that cryptographic hash, in addition to the G10 and serial number, results in a large number of data elements or data characters. It used to be like 90 some characters, and that's what the most recent decree from December says. But because there's been this huge pushback in the industry on the difficulty of getting that huge barcode that results from that huge number of characters to be readable and small enough on a package that it doesn't overwhelm the real estate you have available, that CRPT, the government government contractor, the company that's public-private company that has been given the contract to implement all this, they've recently been telling people that they're going to cut the size of that cryptographic hash down, or reduce the number of characters. I've heard from some people that they were told that they were going to cut it in half in the formal announcement that I've seen from CRPT. They just say they're going to reduce the number. I've not seen, maybe someone on the call has seen more recently any details on exactly how small that's going to get. But it's a little confusing because it's the contractor who is telling us that the size is reduced, yet the government decree still says the larger number of digits or characters. So there you go.
So that's interesting, because if they have devices that they're handing out, I guess they'd have to pull those back and then reissue new devices that would create a shorter code, or I don't know whether they're hashing the hash or something like that.
No, I think you're exactly right, because that device has to be set up to offer the hash at a certain size. Exactly right. Yeah, but things are still, things have not gone live yet, other than the pilot. They've been doing a pilot. Cryptographic hash, I believe, was added to the pilot last summer. That's how we know that companies were having trouble generating readable barcodes, last summer and this fall, because they were trying to do it in the pilot and they were having difficulty. So, yeah.
Now, with the EU FMD going in last Saturday, I believe it was. I've been looking. I haven't seen any news. What happened? Did all the lights go out in Europe when they flipped the switch? Or
yeah, good question. Well, the last word I saw from the EMVO is that 90% of the drugs on the market by volume are the subject of have already been onboarded. Okay, so the companies that are putting those drugs on the market, which are so that what that says is the largest manufacturers are probably now onboarded with the EMVS. What it sort of hides is that really is only about half or less of the number of manufacturers that are out there. It's just the smaller manufacturers are the ones, the majority of companies that probably have not onboarded yet. I don't have any of those numbers, but it is good that 90% of the products that are introduced into the market today are covered and have data in the EMVS and therefore in the national repositories. But the problem is, until you get to 100%, you're going to have potential for patients not to get their drugs. And so what is probably happening is that pharmacies who are making use of the authentication capability, and by the way, that number is small, but the number that the companies that are probably trusting it, and they're getting a large number of scans that are not verified. And what the law says is that they're not allowed to give that product to a patient if it did not verify. And if they did that, then they would, Europe would be experiencing this week a bunch of shortages of drugs, because there'd be a large number, some percentage of drugs that just wouldn't be dispensable. And since that's likely not happening, properly not happening too, the problem is that now, how do you turn that back on and get people to say, okay, tell people, okay, now all the data is there next year or whenever it happens, and so you should start trusting it and not dispense anything, because the date that they were given was last Saturday.
Right. And one of the things that I was surprised to see was that the dispensers not only have they have to verify each drug, but they also have to decommission them.
Yeah, that's part of the scan. Maybe there's probably a lot of people on the call, or some people on the call, who have actually seen the solutions that are in pharmacies. I have not seen them, so I don't know exactly how they flip a switch or how they tell the system that, hey, I'm going to scan a product that I want to dispense, and therefore it should be decommissioned, as opposed to just saying check on this product but don't decommission it. I assume that capability is in there. I don't know, though, so maybe if there's someone on the call, they can enlighten us on that.
Okay.
But, so the question is, do the pharmacists have to understand the significance of something called, quote, decommissioning, and what it is? And the fact that if you do it once and then do it again tomorrow, you're in trouble because you've already decommissioned it the day before or last week or whenever.
Right.
Yeah, and so you're going to get what's called an alert, indicating that it's a suspicious or likely counterfeit, or that you should not dispense that drug. Yep.
Oh, interesting. So if you're actually dispensing, let's say, and I know most of the packages are dispensed whole in the EU, but if you were dispensing from a container and you hit that barcode twice,
yep,
you might get an issue on the second one.
Yeah, depending on how much time there is, I don't know, there might be some sort of time frame that if you just double scan it really quickly, that it's not going to give you an alert. But again, I don't know. I don't know that level of details because I've not actually seen a pharmacy, the implementation in the pharmacy. So.
Right. So that might be handled in the front end in the pharmacy. Yeah. So it's just, did you really mean to do this?
Yeah, somebody's certainly thought of all those kinds of issues, hopefully, and implemented that kind of a solution there.
Carl has another question, and this will be a.
Oh yeah, maybe Carl knows.
This will be an interesting one. Actually, he has one about the FDA. Hey, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dirk, I just wanted to get your observations. You have a lot of knowledge on the wholesaler side. So what do you think about I looked at it as, I've learned that if you want to keep up on the FDA, you have to now track Commissioner Gottlieb's Twitter. And
yep.
We're in the age of Twitter. And so he twittered out about the warning letter for McKesson. Yeah. Normally, we'd have to kind of like search that out on the FDA website. Yep. But he decided to promote that, partially because it was a DSCSA warning letter, but also that it overlapped with the opioid epidemic
Exactly.
and issues. But it
Yep.
was a real slammer to kind of put us all back into awareness of FDA's concerns about illegitimate and suspect product.
That's right.
Which has been kind of the sleeping dog in this DSCSA rollout.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, Carl, I was just reading that Gottlieb's letter. Actually, I call it a statement, which I was surprised. You get down to the middle of it, and now all of a sudden, 2 paragraphs on McKesson's recent warning letter, and it was really just sort of an unlucky situation where the DSCSA problems that McKesson experienced just happened to involve an opioid.
Right.
And that alone, I understand that alone should have caused a even more heightened degree of response from McKesson. But it's really unfortunate that happened, because now Gottlieb, in his statement today, or actually a couple of days ago, was aimed at the opioid, stopping opioids from being distributed and sold, illicit opioids, I should say. And just because of the McKesson recent activity, their warning letter had to deal with an opioid situation, that he was able to include that. It was just bad luck, I think, on McKesson's part. So, and by the way, the reason I was reading it and studying up on it is Fridays is not only open mic day for the center, it's also Dirk's day to write Monday's RxTrace essay, and so that's the topic I'm covering for Monday.
Oh,
There we
okay.
go.
But don't you think it represents an escalation of enforcement discretion? I mean, that 483 was written in July. There were numerous responses. FDA didn't find them acceptable, and then it escalated to a warning letter. And I agree, it's bad luck that it tied into an opioid, and that's what everybody's talking and thinking about. But it was an escalation over a 7-8 month period with FDA in McKesson's inability to resolve the issue.
Yeah, it is. If you just look at those particular letters, the way that FDA describes it in their most recent warning letter, it really does sound like McKesson was deficient, not only originally, but also in their response to the FDA's original 483. And it really seems like the FDA, I interpret the FDA as being pretty unhappy about that. And so they're making an example of McKesson, unfortunately. And it may be a tactic that is designed to make everyone take notice, not just the other wholesalers, but everyone, because in the description of the events, it sounds like the pharmacies involved did the right thing, at least my read of what they did, and it sounds like the manufacturers did the right thing. That's not always going to be the case in this situation. The way it's described in the warning letter, it was only McKesson that seemed to fall down in their interpretation of the DSCSA in certain parts, and also in their response and handling of the original events and in the response to the FDA. So, but I think they're just making an example so that we're all talking about it, and that word will get out to other companies, so that hopefully we'll have fewer of these, not more of them in the future. But obviously, I suspect we're likely to see more of these in the future.
No, I totally agree. I've been in the GMP space for 35 years, and that's exactly the technique that FDA uses, is usually to pick out one of the big manufacturing players and publicly chastise them. And in many cases, that the further escalation was the consent decrees that occurred.
Yeah.
I don't think we're anywhere near a consent decree in the case of DSCSA, but imagine that as an absolute worst case. If somebody was so deficient in their operations around DSCSA, they could get nailed with a consent decree.
Yeah, I would hope that wouldn't happen to one of the big publicly held wholesalers, but I can imagine that potentially happening if you have maybe a smaller organization that's not publicly held that sort of completely ignores everything.
Yes.
Obviously, McKesson was not in that boat. They did have programs. They made an attempt. They were just not quite up to par for what FDA expected.
Totally agree. Yeah, I'm worried about those small players because
Yep.
one of those early FDA meetings, I actually went and I got up after, I think it was Optelvision had said, oh, we can get these things implemented in 6 weeks. And I said, that's not the reality. Small companies may not even have the cash and are going to take, 3 to 6 months just to decide if they're going to commit that kind of cash to serialize these products. And I think we're going to see that particularly forward into the retail.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I was also going to point out that wholesale distributors are used to dealing prior to the DSCSA. They were mostly just used to dealing with state regulators, the state boards of pharmacies where their distribution centers were located. Other than they also were dealing with the DEA, obviously, for opioids and other class 2 drugs. So it wasn't entirely just local, but for these types of things, they're not used to having the FDA at all being involved in any of these kinds of enforcement actions. And it's a new day. With more every year, more requirements are going to be on more and more companies, and we'll see how it goes and how the FDA reacts to all these. But I think you don't want to be the one that's made an example of, as we've seen with McKesson.
Oh, you bet. And the industry is filled with GMP companies that have had to hire Hyman Phelps and McCormick to help them get out of these situations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of high-priced Washington lawyers who are waiting for these opportunities.
Yeah. But Dirk, that's a good point about the both the wholesalers and dispensers not having much interaction with the FDA in this kind of compliance issue. That's going to be maybe more of a case, especially as state regulators are working with FDA on certain aspects of this.
That's right. And in fact, the DSCSA allows states to enforce these portions of the regulation, the DSCSA. And I really thought that that's what would end up happening, is the FDA would just sort of outsource the enforcement, particularly at the dispenser and wholesale distributor level, since they're already used to dealing with those sort of agencies. And one of the things that I have on my list of things to do for a future RxTrace essay would be to try and contact some of our friends in the California Board of Pharmacy space that we've worked with back when they were doing an e-pedigree, and find out if they've done any enforcement actions, or just search on the internet for any enforcement, DSCSA related enforcement that maybe the California Board of Pharmacy. They're the biggest, and they're probably the most active in enforcing things like this. So I would assume we're going to see, or we have seen maybe already, actions by that organization against violators in the state of California. So
I know I live in Pennsylvania, and I know that pharmacies in Pennsylvania have been asked by the Pennsylvania department for DSCSA data. I don't know if anything's come of that, or if they even know what they're looking at once they get the data, but I know they've been asked.
Yeah. Wow.
So we have Daniel on the line. He's got a question for you. This should be an interesting one. Hey, Daniel.
Hi, Dan Fritz here. Yeah.
Hey, Dan.
So Dirk, I wanted to ask you, this is all of these regulations are great for the legal supply chain, controlling, but the illegal, so counterfeit product is many times, I guess, bypassing this all. And I thought, what is about the concept of patient authentication, enabling them, I don't know, either through an SMS or a smart app or something to do the authentication themselves?
Sure. Well, I've always been opposed to that, particularly in markets where the legitimate supply chain doesn't have a large number of counterfeits in them, because you have a program that you would have to have a program that encouraged people to call this number or scan this barcode on this website or whatever to find out if it's good. And everybody would go out with their latest prescription, scan their barcode, and find out there's nothing wrong with it, that they got, if they got it from a pharmacy. And then if you say, okay, well, if you bought it from the guy in the street corner, or somebody gave you this drug, you can also scan it to find out if it's legitimate or not. You're actually just sort of encouraging people to do that, because particularly if the product has been copied or they somehow did get a legitimate number put on that package, but it's really not good. So no, I'm opposed to that in the United States and in the EU. And many other countries too. I think it's a great idea in Africa or any other market where there's more than 5% of the drugs on the market are known to be counterfeit, because there people do know. They've heard stories of neighbors who did get counterfeit drugs and had adverse reaction to them, or perhaps even worse. And so it makes sense there, because the public is aware that there's a problem, and you're giving them the opportunity themselves to take it upon themselves to help solve that problem for the prescriptions that they receive. But that's my opinion. But what do you think? Let me ask you that, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree. I think I saw some statistics recently that the number of suspected counterfeits in Germany was 57 or something cases were reported. So I think it's pretty tight here and locked down. But in other countries, I've heard it's up to 30% of the products could be counterfeit. And there, I think it really makes sense to, potentially, and it sounds like, it could be a good use case for a pilot or something in a specific country. I don't know if somebody's open for that or something, but.
Well, in fact, there's some of the countries that you're referring to are in Africa, and some of the countries in Africa, some of the products being shipped into Africa by larger manufacturers, they've applied SMS tags or scratch off tags, where you scratch off the tag and you dial a number, or you send an SMS text message with that number in it to a certain verification service, and get a response whether or not it's good or bad. And that exists today. There are some things, I guess, that are I don't know enough about to know whether or not they've accommodated for potential counterfeiters to publishing their own verification service that just verifies everything. But yeah, no, the countries that have that problem, giving the ability for patients to do their own authentication, I think, is the right way to go, until that number gets down, until you have more of a legitimate supply chain that's secure, like it is here in the United States and EU and elsewhere.
Good.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Dirk. Thanks. You can you can send me your resume if you have it free. Just.
Well, thanks, Daniel. I appreciate that.
There you go. So, Dirk, just continue on with this whole business of serialization, track and trace, and to your point, a lot of these are really truly not track and trace. They're portions of that. How does this apply to maybe some other industries?
Yeah, good question. In fact, the Food Safety and Modernization Act was passed, I think, in 2010, actually before the DSCSA, which wasn't until 2013. And it included requirements to the FDA, instructions. This is Congress giving instructions to the FDA commissioner to establish some track and trace characteristics for certain types of foods, and leaving some of the discretion up to the FDA to figure out. But it sounded pretty strong, and I think back at that time there were a lot of companies who thought that, oh great, we're going to be able to start track and trace food, we're going to sell some more solutions to do that kind of thing. But then the FDA did a pilot, and I don't know what the results of the pilot were, but immediately after they did the pilot, they seemed to back away from requiring the level of track and trace that the pharma industry eventually has gone toward because of requiring serialization and things like that. So FDA seemed to back away from it. And what you see today is certain companies that have their own supply chain from farm to their restaurant or chain or to their grocery store, that kind of thing, like Walmart, Whole Foods, Chipotle, and others. They have gone beyond what the requirements of the regulation has in order to make sure that they don't have adverse reactions, that their customers do not have adverse reactions, that kind of thing. So, but it's not serialization at the unit level. It might be container serialization, and or lot level, just lot level, what I call serialization at the lot level. Those kind of things in order to do kind of track and trace. And really a lot of what you're trying to do there, you're trying to accomplish, for food, you're trying to accomplish something like what the FDA is doing, where after the fact, after something goes wrong, now you can quickly go back and figure out where did it come from and where else did it go, so that you can sort of recall things, you can stop things before the adverse reactions start spreading and blowing up on you. That's similar to what the FDA's approach in the DSCSA is, in that once a suspect drug is found, either through an adverse reaction or hopefully found before a patient gets it, you can then quickly find out where it came from and what the extent of it is. So there's at least some similarities between the two, but there's also a lot of big differences there.
Yeah.
I've also been looking at the cannabis supply chain. I've written an article recently about sort of, it's kind of a comparison between what we learned in pharma, track and trace, and what's necessary for marijuana in states. What I found is that states have chosen, because the operators in the marijuana supply chain where it's legal is a bunch of small operators compared to food and compared to pharma particularly. There's no big multinationals doing it yet. It's all small retailers and small growers and that kind of thing. And the supply chains, by the way, are always within the state. So if there is a supply chain, it's just all within that state. So it's small growers to small retailers. Maybe there's a packager in between. I don't know. But so because they're small, and to worry about, if you mandated that everybody had to go out and buy their own track and trace solution, now you'd have an interoperability problem. So what they've all done is all the states have chosen a track and trace vendor and mandated that everybody must sign up with that vendor. Okay, so yeah, the state establishes a contract with one vendor, and then that becomes their mandated track and trace solution for all distributions within the state. So then they can highly regulate it, they can monitor it, that kind of thing. And that's significantly different than any of the pharmaceutical track and trace regulations anywhere in the world. So yeah, kind of interesting.
So how do you see that going as more and more states legalize marijuana? The growth of the industry, let's say, you might get into larger growers, start to get into wholesale, where now they have to transact and transfer between states and these different systems.
Yeah, the only way I see it going to a supply chain that goes outside of a single state is if the federal government legalizes marijuana, and if and when they do that, I should say when they do that. I don't believe it's an if, I believe it is a when, and when they do that, they're still going to want that track and trace, in fact, much more than pharmaceuticals, because the problem of the current existing illicit marijuana supply chain will exist well beyond the legalization, because, and this is experience, by the way, this is from experience in California and Washington states, where the business was projected to grow at a certain rate, and it has not come anywhere near those projected growth rates, because the illicit suppliers are still in business because their product is so much cheaper. They don't have to pay tax. They don't have to do testing. And they don't have to package. You don't have to track and trace. So their overhead is so small that their product is cheaper. And if you're someone who was already buying from a supplier, illicit supplier prior to legalization, you probably are just going to keep getting it from your local guy.
Uh-huh. But do you see that whole supply chain, not any supply chain, let's just talk about the product itself, kind of going the way we see wine and chocolate and beer? You know, we kind of, maybe just as Americans, we kind of overdo it with the things that we buy, or, you know, boutique things. We want to know, you know, whether this is a blue one or a, you know, the green Maui one or what have you. So a provenance from that point of view?
You mean from the end user point of view, or
Yeah, from a consumer that wants to know that this item that I'm buying at a premium really is what it's purported to be.
Yeah, perhaps, probably, in fact, because one of the things, if you're smoking marijuana as opposed to just eating it or using CBD or whatever oil, your concern is that if there's an improper amount of pesticide on the leaves that you're smoking, that could be very dangerous to your health. And so that's part of the testing that the state regulations require. You have to test and prove at a very frequent period of time. Very frequently you have to test, and the testing is not cheap, as I understand, and you have to prove that the pesticide level is at an acceptable level, which is very low. If you're a consumer and that's something you're worried about, which I would think most people would be, yeah, I think you would want to know that what you're buying is legitimate product and has gone through all of the requirements that the federal government at that time would require. But once the federal government makes it legal, and you can sort of look at this, see this kind of happening in Canada, because Canada just in the last 6 months has passed their regulation or law to make it fully legal. The legitimate companies are going to start getting involved. Larger organizations will get involved. There will become a supply chain, which doesn't, as I pointed out earlier, doesn't really exist in the States, because it's such a limited geographic region. As soon as you make it so that the grower can be located anywhere in the United States, or maybe even outside the United States with proper controls, then you think you're going to see more track and trace rather than less, because you have a lot more players involved, and the volumes involved will be a lot larger. And the illicit trade being already well established, you want to make sure that there's no linkage between the two, either in or out. So,
interesting.
That's my thought.
Have you seen any? So we've in the U.S. not to be bouncing back and forth between things, but that's what I'll do. As the serialization part of this, and we move into more the data side of verification and then tracking backwards, do you see the different trading partners, as they start to receive serialized product, start to look at the regulation and realize the level of precision that they're going to need in managing the product?
You mean you're asking, do I think that the companies that are receiving the barcode now as kind of a surprise? Oh, what's this? That they'll start asking questions? Is that your question?
Whether they're starting to, I know it's a weird question, but
well, the answer to that is no.
Oh, okay.
But maybe I misunderstood your question, Bob.
Well, I think what I was saying was that as people start to, and again, this all started with the manufacturer, so the manufacturers have been steeped in this, so have the large wholesalers. But as we start to get to retail pharmacy or hospital pharmacy, number one, I think to your point, and maybe you get some thoughts around this, as they start to see these barcodes show up and maybe be confused about what they are and what to do with them. But secondarily, as they start to see things that they're accountable for, that they start to realize that they really need to have a higher level of precision in how they handle the product.
Yeah, I think you're right. As long as they are aware, they have the awareness that you have assigned to them to know what their responsibilities are. And anyone on the call that deals a lot with the pharmacy segment I do not. I've done a little bit of consulting a few years ago early on when DSCSA first came on with a couple of companies that were aiming at pharmacies, but I've not had any experience actually with pharmacies. But based on what I've heard from others who have been working with pharmacies is that there's almost no understanding. Our friend Ria Chow from LSpedia recently wrote a great blog essay about she went to her pharmacist and asked and got a prescription and said, "Hey, have you ever seen these barcodes?" And the pharmacist said, "Yeah, I've seen those barcodes." And she said, "Do you know what these are?" And she said, "No, I have no idea what those are for." you know, and today, now that pharmacist doesn't have any obligations with regard to that barcode yet today, but they will in the future. But they also have other obligations today that they're expected to be following, and that particularly is to do with the lot level TI, TH, and TS. And so my hope is that they should all be aware of the DSCSA, or at least someone in their organizations. And I fear that it's widespread that they do not. And so I think we're gonna experience. That's really the same thing that's just happened now in Europe, where the law went into effect and pharmacies immediately, as of Saturday, have obligations that they're supposed to follow, and they're the critical part of the whole purpose of the FMD. And yet so few of them are aware of what their obligations are, or even that it exists. And that's pretty scary. And I think we're going to start hitting that. The pharmacy's obligations with respect to the barcode start in November of 2020. So what's that, next year and a half?
Right. Actually, looks like Carl had the same kind of you had the same kind of reaction at your pharmacy.
Oh, absolutely. I have a pharmacist that I talked to quite a bit, and she had no real idea. They're all observing what's happening. And I think, Dirk, you had it right. I think particularly in a Walgreens or a CVS or a Rite Aid system, somebody else is taking care of the early implementation or operational aspects, but there's been no forward training yet.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And even the smaller organizations, because the wholesalers are holding the TI, TH, and TS in their accounts in the wholesalers system, that's sort of propping up all of their customers to make sure that they are kind of compliant with the regulation, because they can access that data when necessary. But when it comes to 2020, when you're not allowed to buy anything that doesn't have the 2D barcode on it unless it's grandfathered, and now how do you know if it's grandfathered or not? I mean, there's all of those subtle details are going to have to be known by every pharmacy day one from then on.
Yeah, my fear is that the unintended consequence could be to knock a lot of mom and pop pharmacies out of business. And they really serve patients in a very fundamental way.
And that's why I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, but this is where I don't think you're going to see the FDA marching into mom and pop pharmacies. That's going to fall to the boards of pharmacies. And really, the boards of pharmacies need to implement an education program within their states to educate their pharmacists, because that's the connection. That's the connection between the regulators and those that are being regulated, and they need to give them that opportunity to be educated. And then if they still walk into a pharmacy and find out that, hey, we've been providing you with all this educational material, webinars, printed material, website, and all that, and you don't know anything about it yet, how can you tell me that, right?
Yeah.
You justify whatever your fine or whatever you end up doing against someone who's failing to fulfill their obligation. But it won't be the FDA, I don't think. We'll see.
Dirk, Cola has a question.
Hey, Cola.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Very well. Yeah, and listening about the need here at the pharmacy level for training and yeah, we have it operational, but what do we do with it? What are the policies and the directives and the actual procedures? And, I was just wondering, are we starting to hear anything about efforts through a pharmacy organization, association of some sort that's starting to address these? Is anyone aware of any efforts ongoing?
Well, I'm not aware, but maybe someone else on the call is. I don't really deal with the dispenser segment, at least I have not up to this point, so I'm not the right guy to ask, but certainly, hopefully there's other people on the call. Carl or others? Daniel?
I know that the ASHP is, for a couple of years, they've had education segments, and I'm sure that they'll start to ramp those up as the need for pharmacists to really focus on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I agree, Cola. It really needs to be a big effort, and it's you've got the NACDS for the large pharmacies. They may not need to do as much as the organizations aimed at the smaller pharmacists, because it's the big guys already have lobbyists and they're already aware of the DSCSA pretty well, and they've got IT departments centrally located, and all those guys are working on solutions that help their pharmacies meet the regulations, even if the local pharmacist doesn't know that much about it. In fact, I go to big chain pharmacies for my drugs for some reason, and they have such, you can tell they're following SOPs for everything they do, right? And SOPs are a huge part of the DSCSA compliance in the pharmacy and wholesale distributors too. Everybody's got to have, whenever the FDA refers to systems, the term systems, I always read that as SOPs, because SOPs, when you have multiple that relate to each other, really constitute a system for meeting those regulations. So, the small mom and pops, they've got to either write their own SOPs, or more than likely they're going to have to buy them somehow, because it has to be written by someone who knows right down to the detail what that pharmacy is obligated to do under every possible situation in terms of counterfeit drugs, or a suspect product, or truly illegitimate product. And that's going to happen everywhere.
Good, thanks. So Dirk, we only have a couple minutes left, and so I'll hit you with the big question, and that is, in the next minute or so, the EU system is more or less a centralized system. The US system is panning out to be more of a decentralized system. Interoperability, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, interoperability is going to be a real issue in 2023, when the DSCSA sort of blossoms into a solution that has to be interoperable, that's mandated by the regulation, but it's not explained in the regulation. What does that mean? What are the implications of the requirements for interoperability? And that's really up to the FDA. And I've made no secret on RxTrace of my belief that the FDA is sort of falling down. They're late in figuring out some of these things. And so, yeah, interoperability in the EU is determined by the fact that it's a government mandated and nonprofit industry implementation. So everybody follows the same implementation. It's interoperability really isn't an issue there. But in the United States, it will be, because these solutions are going to be, multiple vendors are going to offer solutions, and maybe even individual companies are going to want to create their own solution. It becomes very, very problematic, but I don't know how to answer it beyond that, Bob. To get interoperability to work with multiple solution vendors and implementations, you got to start pretty early and establish standards. And
right.
No doubt we'll be using GS1 standards. Everyone is expecting EPCIS to be a big part of it, but how? And there's so much to define, and it's not being done.
Right.
No, yeah. Hey,
Good.
Bob,
Well,
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why do you call it Open Mic Friday, where Mike is spelled M-I-K-E? That's somebody's name.
Yeah, you know what? How that happened? I call it Open MIC, And then my son, who's in a band and is very musical, said, that's not how you say it. You say M-I-K-E. So
Really?
I really don't know whether he's right or not. So I took his.
Well,
But you're right. It
he
looks
would
like
know.
it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in a band when I was in high school, and we would spell it M-I-C for microphone.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I might have to change that.
Well, ask him to prove what he's telling you.
Okay. Well, Dirk, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. It was a lot of fun, and it's always good to talk to you through some of the details and nuances of these regulations and laws.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for contributing. I appreciate that.
Okay, and we'll be publishing Dirk's contact information up on the site if you'd like to get a hold of him and have a further conversation. And we'll be also posting this on YouTube also. Next week, last week we had a gentleman from the Accord project, and they're looking at blockchain technology and putting regular contract language into blockchain through smart contracts. And next week we'll have a discussion where we'll be actually talking about a specific role in blockchain and dispute resolution. So stay tuned for that on the pieces of that could possibly go into a smart contract and how they may reference the legal regular contract back and forth. But thank you everyone for being on today, and